Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Wow. You see, it has really been 2 months since the last time we recorded, but that's okay because we took some time. We took some time off. It's summer. Why would you not go and hang out on different places? And I went to Saskatchewan. It was great. I drove, first time ever driving all that way and all that way back, and it was great. What adventures did you get onto before we start the show officially? Weren't you supposed to go to Whistler or something
Well, we headed
or
up
Salt Spring?
having a lot of problems with the ferries this year.
Yeah,
So yeah, we went up to
the
the
ferries
mountains
have
and
been a
just
real pain.
sat by the lake, and yeah. And then of course I've been finishing a book.
That's right. I actually was kind of hoping you'd mention the book because I'm very excited about it, but you won't be able to tell anybody anything until it is done. So,
No, I can say something.
oh, okay. Do tell.
Well, I can just say as an update for our Kickstarter backers, the latest book, Monsters of Feyland 2, the manuscript is now done. So we know the book is about 155 pages, almost 120 monsters, but we have added some full page art. So there's not as many as monsters as we thought, just a few, like three less, basically, I think. Um, and yeah, all the text is done. So now that's with layout, and a lot of the layout is done. So the next stage was writing an art list for Travis, the artist, of all of the descriptions of all the creatures, and for all the full page art. So now that is going to him. So hopefully next week he starts doing the art, and then we hope to have the digital book in November, hopefully, and then the physical books in December.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
a lot of really,
So this. Oh, go ahead.
a lot of really unusual Fey-like creatures. A lot of humor in this book, probably more humor than before, even, and a wide range. So there's everything from CR 1/8 to 20, and quite a few creatures from about
Oh, wow.
CR 10 and higher. So a lot of tough, challenging creatures, and then of course lots of good creatures as well.
Well, I'm excited because it's been. I mean, it's only been a few months since I've delved into one of your books because uh, we've played so sporadically because of the summertime.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm jazzed because like you and I were talking about before the show, uh, it's getting very close to where we're going to be playing in person again,
Yeah,
in a very new venue in a very new place, which is going to be very exciting. And I I'm so done with being at home all the time. I'm so done.
yeah,
I've been going out and hanging out with people periodically, but uh, I really just want to get back to a non-COVID world, which I know we won't, but it's going to be exciting to actually start feeling like gaming is normal again and in person. So, because that's the best part. But
yeah,
of
yeah.
course,
Hopefully we
the
get to
show that we're
play.
doing right now.
Sorry.
Oh, well, I was gonna say the show that we're doing right now because we got talking and I totally bailed on what the show's about. By the way, just really quickly, the show you're listening to right now or watching is Two Wizards and a Mic. Myself, Shane, and Andrew over here. We talk about D&D because we're at that age now where we're getting, we're considered old players, and we've been playing for a very long time, and we're talking a lot about different things uh, to do with the game. Uh, Go back, listen to stuff previously because we've been talking for a while now. I think we started in February of this year, roughly, give or take. But we're up to, I think, episode. What is this, 20? I don't even see. We took time off and now everything's gone to hell. But that's okay. We'll get next week. Next week is actually going to be very exciting because there are some changes coming to the world of D&D. For better or for worse, I'm not sure yet. I'm sort of sitting back quietly and stroking my beard and going, not sure what to make of this. But next week we're going to talk in depth about that because we have opinions. I already have opinions, and I don't even know all the changes yet because I've been, staying away from it. But yeah. But this week, what are we talking about?
We're talking about giants.
And I hope that hopefully giants won't change in the new edition, but that's okay. Sorry, that was a loaded question.
Yeah.
But tell me about some giants, because I pulled out Volos. I started reading yesterday and going through over the history of giants. And to be honest, I'm actually ashamed that I don't think I've ever read the description of where giants came from. And I actually learned a hell of a lot. So, yeah, take us there.
All right. So giants, another classic D&D creature and in fantasy. So we're talking about the humanoid, massive humanoid creature. Usually not that bright and quite violent, usually evil. And there are some, though, that use magic and are actually intelligent. Famous giants. So the most obvious is the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk, which, by the way, is a fairy tale from 1734.
Wow.
That giant is famous for the phrase "fee fi fo fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread."
So I used to love saying that.
Yeah, as a kid, that giant and that phrase never escaped me. And yeah, that whole magical world of a giant castle, a giant's home. So that's the first most famous giant many people, especially in the Western world, would know. There's also, of course, Goliath from the Bible. Then we have, back to D&D, we have a famous series of adventures called Against the Giants, originally written in the 70s and then re-released in the early 80s, written by Gary Gygax. And it's a series of 3 adventures where you deal with a giant type for each adventure, and it gets tougher as it goes along. Our group actually was Shane. I'm DMing them in those adventures right now, tweaking them a bit for 5th edition. And yeah, so the fire giant, spoiler alert, the fire giant king in that series of modules is called Snur Iron Belly, and he is quite a character. There's, of course, the mythical Yeti, which is more in Asia, which would be considered a giant as well. And Gulliver's Travels. So many people think of the smaller creatures in Gulliver, but there's also giants in Gulliver's Travels. He visits a land of giants. And then, of course, Roald Dahl's book BFG, which is actually about good giants who collect dreams for children. And much lighter.
Which I just read earlier this year. I actually was going through some of the older books that I had, and I thought, I know this got made into a movie in the last decade at some point. So I just reread it, and I gotta say, it's actually really damn good. I've enjoyed that.
Yeah, all his books I think are great. So giants in size, sometimes large, if it's sort of a giant type. They're very heavy, which can definitely come into play. Very tall, very heavy. They usually live in remote areas. One, because they have a very large area to live and to build homes, and they also, don't want to draw attention necessarily to mass amounts of humanoids. They're very old, not almost as old as dragons. Some do have spells, as we said.
Right.
There's a great section, as Shane mentioned, in Volo's Guide to Monsters, which I think is one of the last really good accessories, appendixes for Dungeons and Dragons, unfortunately, that they weren't more, but it is actually it has a great section on monsters at the front of the book, about hags and mind flayers and beholders, and giants are included. Except I would say the lore, the Forgotten Realms lore about giants, I could personally just leave it. I think the lore that is in the original Giants books is more interesting. One of the first clues for me that something's maybe not going to be the greatest written piece, are the names they use. So one of them is the Empire of Giants is called Astoria, which to me sounds like a flower or a children's fantasy land, not a giant kingdom. And and then there's the names of the giants: Memnor and
All hail Memnor.
Scoreus Stonebones. No.
You know, that to me is like a writer who's sitting there and they have a deadline of like 11 o'clock and they have to submit something, and it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
How about scrotum stone? I can't say scrotum in the book, but okay, how about Scraeus? Yeah, there we go. Good. And then they just write it down and then they send it in, and it's like, whatever. You and I have
100%.
talked about this before, about some of these name schemes that have been created. Yeah. It all feels like it's a deadline related thing to me, because I've written a few books in my time, and there's deadlines, and you get to that point, you're like, I only have 4 hours left for us to, and then you're like slamming your keyboard, pumping stuff out, and then but then you get to that last 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, it's like, Scraeus Stonebones, yeah, there we go, done, submit it, yeah. I'm going to the pub, then you're finished. But they have an issue in some sometimes.
5th edition has a big issue. I don't know about, again, I don't know 2nd, 3rd, 4th. I missed those. But I think, I think they're very important. They really set a foundation for your story. You have a name for your setting usually. You have a name for maybe deities, name for your characters, for monsters. For me, I take hours and hours. I'm not saying that all my names are perfect. But I think they deserve a lot of work, not just thrown out there. And you should at least say it out loud several times and see what it sounds like. And I wonder about that recently, about how much that has done, because a lot of the names are unpronounceable. And again,
back in the day, like 1st edition, or even advanced, like some of the names, I liked most of them.
Yeah.
But again, there's just something about that. It's like they take a dice and they assign like a weather to one, and then they take another one. They're like, okay, well, this is going to be a type of stone, and this is going to be a flower name, and this one's going to be, and then they roll the. But sometimes, a lot of the time, it takes away, I think, for me anyway, as a player, it just definitely, when you hear these names in game, you actually pause and go, sorry, what was it? Sorry, what?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's even like walking up to the village.
Parents hate you?
Yeah, and the village guard, you ask, what's your name? And he says, Fred.
Fred Stonebelly.
Fred Stonebones. All right, so giants. In this section in Volos, the good part of it is that it has examples of the giant language, some words, which I think is great. They talk about giant sacks that they carry, what kind of things could be in them, and that they always have them, which makes sense. And they have examples I love: live pig, a bear skin could be in there, or a keg of ale, just the whole keg. Why not? You can carry it.
They're big enough.
And a caged halfling.
Caged halfling? Is that on the list?
And they mention in there something like, they put in brackets like, only for entertainment. And I'm like, yeah, sure. The giant
caged halfling for amusement.
Only going to use it for entertainment, not on the dinner table. Another one was the skull of an owlbear. I think that's cool. They have a section, though. Here's another questionable addition, I think. You don't need to go on and on about rock throwing. They get
Oh.
rocks and they throw them, and they hit, and they do a lot of damage, and they can throw them a long way. I think we got that. I think we were pretty good with rock throwing. We got it down. We didn't really need a section on
Don't
that.
don't most
My,
of the figures that you can get of giants usually have some sort
yeah,
of large weapon, and most of them
yeah,
are like large rocks?
it's true. They talk in detail. They give you examples of the lifespan, which I think is cool. So, hill giants are the youngest, up to 200 years. Stone giants up to 800 years old. So you're talking like elves too. Um, there's a great section on role playing. This might be the best part of um, the whole inclusion in this book. So they talk about the personality your giant could have, your ideals, your bonds, your flaws, which is really great for building an interesting
Yeah.
character. So in fifth edition, these are all really classic monsters. I think these are all in earlier editions as well. So you have the hill giant, 16 feet tall. They have a great club and a rock. They're dumb. They hunt, they forage, they raid, they're bullies, they're lazy. It is the basic giants. It's sort of just like a big orc, really, in some ways. Then it gets more interesting. The stone giant, 18 feet tall. Again, a great club, rock throwing. But they're more reclusive. They're peaceful, actually, if you leave them alone. And they live away in caves. The fire giant, now it gets more dangerous. These are much tougher opponents. 18 feet tall, again, like the stone giant. Great sword. And this great sword is not a 2d6. I'm pretty sure I'll look it up now, but I think it's like 46 or 66. It's nasty. I know because I just used these against Shane's party. Somehow you survived the fire giants.
I think we ended up running away at some point. I think we avoided some of the giants.
You did run it.
Or
Yeah,
we locked them out. We got somewhere where we were able to cave in the mouth of wherever we were, and they weren't able to get us.
So fire giant.
So basically, sword. Yeah, we ran away.
Yeah. Fire giant great sword. Are you ready?
Ready.
66 plus 7. So maximum, what is that? 43. Yeah, 43 damage.
Not something you want to get hit with.
They get 2 attacks with it. So 86 damage max. So fire giant. The warriors, they're organized. They're crafters. They live in volcanoes, rocky mountains. They have castles. They have siege weapons. They have, big ballista. Very dangerous. Frost giants, a little bit bigger, 21 feet tall. Great axe. The great axe, 3d12 plus 6. Again, nasty damage. They're fierce, hardy warriors. They're raiders. They respect brute strength. So they are very similar to white dragons. They're just hunters and beast-like, which makes sense in the frosty region, 2 more basic giants. The cloud giant, we're getting up to 24 feet tall. They have a morning star, rock, and spells. They live way up in the mountains, even maybe on a floating in a floating castle, a cloud castle. They often keep an eyrie, so they have like hippogriffs and griffins and rocks and other flying animals. They're risk takers. Well, it's easy to do that if you're how tall? 20 feet tall, and you live in the sky, and you have spells. I'm a risk taker.
Not much hurts me anyway.
Yeah. Okay, the last regular giant is the storm giant. Now we're up to 26 feet tall. Great sword again, rock. They can shoot out lightning. They have other spells. They can swim, which is a good way to surprise players. I like that. They are seers. They live far away from the world. They see the big picture. They rarely deal with any other giants. And sometimes humanoids worship them as gods. So I like all these. This is all flavor from the core monster manual for 5e. A lot of good stuff. And then you have extra giants like the Cyclops, the Etten, a two-headed giant where the heads often are at odds because it's actually two separate beings. The Fomorian, which is this twisted mutant giant who lives in the Underdark. And actually their effect is they can look at you and create like deformities on your character as well. Then we have the ogre, we have the troll. These are very classic in all fantasy books. And then the oni, which is it kind of betrays what it really is. It's an ogre magi. And so those are pretty nasty. Combine an ogre and a spellcaster. That's that's like that'd be like having a character who's a caster who's wearing plate armor. Have fun with that. And then we have a lot of giants in our books. So in our Phalan book, we have the Mist Giant, which it's a spell casting giant who can kind of disappear into the mist. We have the Rock Giant in here, which not only can throw rocks, but actually is made of rocks, so he never runs out of them. And we also have the king of the exactly. We have the king of the giants in here, the Mountain Lord, who is really, really high level giant.
Have we? I don't think we've encountered that before.
No.
Okay.
In the Underworld book, we have the opposite. We have the Giant Queen. So we decided we'd put her down in the Underdark, and she rules that. And Travis, the artist, we thought it would be interesting if we basically illustrated her as Pat Benatar from the Warriors movies. So we did.
Okay. That's awesome.
Love is a battlefield, man. There's also the Lava Giant here. That's pretty self-explanatory. The Thunder Giant, again, self-explanatory. And then the Gloom Giant, which is sort of this creepy, spooky, almost Fey-like giant. In the city book, now it wouldn't make sense to have giants in urban areas, right? So we have a half giant who lives underground in the sewers.
Oh. Okay,
and we're not afraid of mentioning we have half giants in our books, and you can wonder where they came from, like some people who are worried about that. In our Monsters of the Wilderness book, we have a Biclops. We thought it would be funny to have a two-headed Cyclops, so it just has two eyes.
Nice.
And we have a lot of trolls and ogres in these books. And in this one, we also have the Grim Giant, which is a giant who's able to camouflage himself in hill regions, basically becomes part of the hill and then comes to life.
That's cool.
So many,
it kind of makes me think of that big famous thing on the hillside in England somewhere, the large, that just kind of getting up and being like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah. Or like our chief here in Squamish in Vancouver here.
Oh, yeah.
So Yetis, interestingly enough, the 5e people decided not to include them as giants, but as monstrosities, which actually I don't think makes sense because in the Yeti lore, I'm pretty sure it's pretty clear they're giants. So the pros for giants, there's great options for role playing. You know, you basically have a humanoid in giant form. So anything, all those kind of characteristics you could attach to a human or a dwarf or something, you can attach them to a giant. And that can be a lot of fun.
Well, especially if you have like that giant from Jack and the Beanstalk, which is always depicted as being like, 150 feet tall kind of thing. And all of its furniture is massive and, like made out of large trees and things and all that kind of stuff. And you're like a little tiny mouse kind of running around and everything. That is, I got to say, that would actually be a cool adventure to do. You have to go and do something with this giant or something. And you can just barely squeeze under the door or something.
Yeah, it would be fun. I think, like you say, to make checks to climb up the chair, you'd be like climbing a mountain. Maybe the giant soup is like, it's like a bowl of lava, basically, right? Yeah, I agree. That's actually my next point I was going to make, is that these layers, or the environment of the giant, is so much fun because everything's so big and so strange. Um, they're a very intimidating creature. Even now, like when I run the game, all the people are right away, they're very, the party wants to focus and take these things out as soon as possible, or run away, like you said. Um, Cons, a lot of times giants end up just being in a combat encounter, and
Yeah.
that can get boring if it's just, you're just, a battle of attrition. And sometimes the giant isn't given that much personality. They're just big and tough and dumb, not smart.
Yeah.
Um, but I think a lot of the cons actually aren't that hard to deal with, because you know giants, they have a lot of advantages, right? You want to use the setting to your advantage. So, for example, the fire giant, you could have pits of lava around. You could even have rivers of lava that come through spontaneously, eruptions, earthquakes. The fire giants also, they can manufacture weapons. So I had that in our encounter. They had these huge ballista. Basically a giant crossbow, and they're firing these huge bolts at the party. Um, and like one of those can do like 30, 40 damage or more. Um, you can also always, when you have a large creature like that, like a giant or a dragon, many times they could have minions, and that can make it more challenging for the party. Because for example, with giants, you could have orcs, or a number of ogres with them, and you could have wave after wave of these creatures. Um, the frost giants, you can use the frozen environment. You can have things melt. You can have, maybe there's like a landslide or an avalanche. I mean, so I think there's lots of ways to make giants challenging and tough. In the original Dungeons and Dragons, in that Against the Giants adventure, they're throwing like, you know, 10 giants and then six more at you, and then 20, and then 10 giant kids. And I know fifth edition, the mechanics, that just doesn't work because the party would not survive. But you can have some of that. Sometimes I think fifth edition has gone too far away from that, and they've made it too easy again. A lot of fifth edition, it's too easy for the characters. The adventure's not challenging enough. Um,
Yeah.
so I think you can increase that by, again, having more giants. A good idea is to have kids. You just lower the stats. Maybe they have, a quarter the hit points. So I think there's many ways to make it challenging. I don't think it's that difficult to do it. There's so many resources online. There's so many adventures with giants. There was basically redid the Giant series adventure in the Storm Giant. It's called the Storm King's Thunder, and that
Yeah.
actually is not a bad adventure. That was put out with fifth edition, and it has a lot of those themes from the original Giant series. And then they even have a conversion of that Against the Giants series in the Yawning Portal book, which has a number of old adventures that they've updated.
Right.
So
Right.
if you
Right.
want to run those original adventures, you could even use those, and you have the new stats. Well, the ones that were used until who knows what happens with D&D.
Well, they'll republish it, of course. They'll rework it and make it so that, it's a friendlier place to be, where it's not like you're breaking into somebody's house or something and they're kind of angry about that, or, you know, 'cause that was actually something I remember, but Against the Giants was going in, and basically the very first adventure, you're like breaking into their house.
Yeah.
Like, unless you like did something creative, like, I don't know, knocked on the door and like, "Hi, we'd like to come inside," or whatever. Who knows how that would play out? But I remember just kind of like, you know, let's sneak in through the whatever, and let's go and do this or do that, and let's hide in the closet, and then come out of the closet and then run around and avoid them. And of course, I was 12 or so at the time playing at that sort of level, but I remember a lot of that kind of stuff. was basically, a bunch of innocent giants who are kind of like living their best life, and they're just messing stuff up, and they're like, "Why are you here? Die!" So yeah. Anyway, I always felt sorry for them. Now, not so much, because the one thing actually really cool about the Volos book is how they describe the giants, because that was not that clear. I think in back, I mean, when you're 12 or 10 years old, who cares what the giant's doing? You just know you have to kill them. But the giants are huge. They're heavy. They make a lot of noise when they're.
Mhm.
You could be sitting around a campfire enjoying yourself with a bunch of people, and then suddenly, like, oh, do you guys kind of feel that the ground kind of moving a little bit? Oh, wait a second, that tree's not quite standing up straight. I love that. That is actually the really cool stuff that I think gets ignored. And I mean, I'm guilty of it too. But actually taking the time, because you said like a few days back, hey, we're going to talk about giants. Have you got Volos? Yes, I do. Great. Go read the thing on giants, because it's really cool. And I was glad I did, because it kind of informs you as a player and as somebody who runs a game once in a while, like, to actually give them life. They're not just, as you were pointing out earlier, they're not just a challenge to defeat. They actually are. They have a culture behind them. They've got all kinds of things. They have relationships of their own that you can play with, and they're not just rogues running around the woods that stumble into a castle once in a while, and they actually have a life to them, which I'm very concerned about in the next edition of the game. But you know what? That who knows? But anyway,
It's a
we'll
good
talk
a
about
good
that
point.
next week.
Yeah, I think it's a good point for sure. There's a lot of fifth edition. That's one really good thing they did, is that, like you say, there's a lot more description. There's a lot more focus on story and on character, even on appearance. Whereas I know in those original adventures, it was a very brief description, and it was usually just reserved for the king, his wife,
Yeah.
maybe a couple of his lieutenants, as far as each giant culture. Um, so yeah, I think that's great to give. It gives more depth to really. I mean, that's what we try to do in our books too with the monsters. Is the monsters are almost more characters than they are monsters, because there's more personality there. There's more depth. So I think always the monster is more interesting if it's a character.
Oh, I agree, especially with it's like, if you've done any writing of any kind, you always really need to remember that the best villains, the best heroes, the best characters that have been created since human beings started writing stuff down have always been uh, following the desire of what the character wants. There's a character X who's the hero. They want to keep the town safe.
Mhm.
But then you have the villain Y who's sitting there going, you know what? I really need to have this thing, and unfortunately, I have to knock down 5 buildings to do it. But that's what I want, and I feel that is the right thing to do. And that's where you have those great head to head sort of disagreements about whether it's a sitting in a room and figuring it out, or going fisticuffs in the streets, that kind of thing. It doesn't matter, really. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what actually happens, because no matter what the adventure, how the adventure goes, or how the story goes, or whatever it might be, as long as there's a driving force behind each of those, the party as well as the villains. Because the villains, I mean, with the exception of just pure evil characters who run around going, I haven't done an evil today, and yeah, those guys look like jerks, so I'm gonna go mess with them for a while. But ultimately, that gets boring very, very quickly, because sure, it's like, I'm gonna go up against Satan again today. That's the best adventure ever. But you have these characters that just really want something that they want, and whether they have to murder a bunch of townies to do it, or an entire region of a map, then it's up to the heroes to actually fight against it and to figure it out. But yeah, I feel that I need to read more about the monster lore in fifth edition to sort of reinvigorate my brain, as it were, because there are so many
Yeah,
cool
there's some
little
really good stuff in
nuggets in
there.
there.
Yeah, there's some good stuff, and
Like,
you make a really good point for dungeon masters too, in that if you know the motivations of your monsters and your NPCs, and you know your setting, you can
oh,
you can really ad lib so much out of that. Like that's all you need to have as your guiding, your guide through your adventure, through running your session. If you know the motivations of your monsters and your NPCs, then no matter what happens, you adjust what they're gonna do, with what's happened. But their motivations sometimes they change too, but in general they're gonna stay the same. And that can, no matter what the party does, you can always adjust. So that's for me, that's one thing I always make sure at the beginning of each session. Okay, what's the motivation? What are the motivations for all of these characters and monsters that are going to be in this session? If I know,
well, oh yeah. Oops, sorry, you cut out there. You're back. Um,
I'm back.
I was just gonna say you cut out, you kind of froze a bit. Um, but to continue on with your point, just for a little second here, the thing that I found the most interesting about cloud giants, because before I started reading this was giants were kind of all the same. They just had different characteristics.
Mhm.
But the cloud giants have a section, a very small section, but it's important about just titled family first. Like that to me is like motivation number one. You walk into a cloud giant's home, you start razzling the pets or razzling the children or something, and they're like, "Hey, I'm gonna squash you now," and which to me is like motivation number one. You don't have to figure it out. You came
Right.
in, maybe you had a bad encounter with a family member, and they're like, "Well, yeah, my cousin just said that you guys kind of stabbed him a bit, and he's now survived and come back to tell me about it. And well, this is what my what is it? What do they have? Morning stars, I think, for cloud giants. Um, yeah, morning. I'm going to use this big spiky ball to bash in your skull for no other reason other than you're screwing with my family. So
Well, they
like
have
that to
that
me is
law in
just
their
really cool.
state, right? If you break into their house,
You're toast.
it's on.
All bets are off.
Yeah. We don't
But
have
yeah,
that
I
here in
love all of
Canada.
this. No, definitely not. Definitely
Well,
not.
I mean, legally we don't have that.
That's true. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But yeah, I mean, as far as I know, as far as I can tell, that fire giants are now just basically a bunch of jerks hanging around in hot areas, going, "I'm really hot and grumpy, and I need slaves to make me feel better." Okay, all right, that sounds like a good idea.
Well,
But
they're
yeah,
busy
I
making
love this
weapons,
section.
right? They're busy making
Yeah,
weapons and armor, and um, yeah.
and now I want to have a bag that I walk around with that just has a caged halfling just for amusement.
Yeah.
So
Or with the
next,
new the new D&D, you could just have a 2-foot human.
that's true.
Well,
You
we'll
you could
talk
always
about
have
that
those.
next week.
I was just gonna say, but we'll save that all for next week because next week we're going to be talking about just recently in the last week or so, Wizards of the Coast has announced their brand new 2024. I think is the launch date, roughly somewhere in there, for what they're calling D&D one
One D&D.
or one D&D, where
D&D
basically
1
they
would
are.
make more sense, but it's not D&D 1. It's 1D.
Oh man. See, yeah, I'm even confused as to what it's called now. But yeah, they're talking. They've been giving us little tidbits here and there of what is changing, at least within from 5e to whatever one D&D is. Doesn't it right that time? But yeah, it's going to be very interesting because there's a lot of things changing that I think are weird, and I think Andrew, you believe some of them are weird as well. you're you're just nodding, going, mm-hmm. But But we'll save that all for next week. So, of course, thank you for watching. Tell people to come on by and check out the show. Subscribe to our audio version of the podcast, which is, of course, somewhere in the thing, somewhere here. And we will see you all next week. And I'm hoping that if I dive into more detail, that it won't be as weird as I think it is so far. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all. See you next week.
Later.